Hi, everyone, and welcome again to the Top Cyber Pro podcast. This is season three, and we got another great guest. We actually today have the father of FedRAMP. So, we're going to be talking a little bit about cloud security, accrediting cloud service providers, as well as other programs that basically were born out of the process that was put into creating FedRAMP. So, we got a lot of ground we're going to cover today. But without further ado, I want to turn it over to Mr. Dave Fairburn.
It's really great to have you having me on today, Jim. I greatly appreciate it.
So tell us about, let's take us back to the little bit of the history of FedRAMP. And well, let's probably first start with what is FedRAMP, because some people watch this may be hearing the term for the first time.
Okay. Well, essentially, FedRAMP is it's FISMA for the cloud. For it's what the federal government needs to implement in order to have some degree of confidence that the applications they're using that are cloud related have been authorized by the FedRAMP process, the requirements that are built within, which is NIST 853 plus a whole bunch of other controls, and then the overall reporting structure that's set up with that. So if you want to deal with, if you're a cloud service provider and you want to sell services to the federal government, whether it's DoD or civilian agency, doesn't matter, it has to be FedRAMP authorized.
Okay. So part of that process, so it is tied to like the risk management framework process, but it's an actual, but it has considerations for cloud security.
Right. So when we created it, I had done something similar on a much smaller scale at Department of Energy for certain segmented on-prem type devices. And then I just kind of blossomed it out to be cloud specific. So, we could deal with the same level of protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of federal data as it was moving across the cloud. And so there were a lot of components that went into that, a lot of arguments that happened for that was necessary for to define specific products and define associated processes that go with those products. And so we kind of turned it all around to be what I thought at the time, and the government has yet to prove me otherwise, that it's a universal, uh, effective way to measure cloud security against a single plat or a single framework and level the playing field from a compliance perspective. Now,
Mhm.
granted, that playing field is not leveled when it comes to the big companies' capabilities, their ability to both streamline and augment services in somewhat real time. And so that part's not level. But if you have a widget and it runs in the cloud, it has to go through FedRAMP authorization, and that is universal no matter what size of company you have.
So there's a couple of things I'd like to ask. Obviously with FedRAMP, just like in RMF for an enclave or a system, you have different levels of classification or approval levels. Could you maybe step us through some of the general different levels of approval that you can get with FedRAMP?
Oh, sure. And there's several. So I'll tell everybody the same thing. And this has been my, rallying cry for 20 plus years is that follow the data. Wherever that data goes, there are certain protection requirements that are directly proportional to how you categorize that data, whether it's low, moderate, high, CUI, unclassified completely, or public data, and so and the NIST, or not NIST, but the National Archives put out definitions for CUI and for different levels of data. And then NIST has the SP60, which kind of walks you through data types and how to put them in their appropriate classification. And the rule of thumb is if one data type that you're storing, processing, or transmitting on behalf of the federal government, if one of those data types happens to reach a moderate or high baseline, then you're all in for moderate or high. So it's, you're one and done, so to speak. So we call it just, sticking to the high baseline.
Mhm.
So if you hit one, You got to do it for everything. And, isn't that what security is all about?
Yeah, so it's a good high watermark. So that's a pretty good approach. Another question I have is, a lot of folks, when cloud made its big explosion into the tech scene, a lot of businesses were moving stuff in the cloud. And then, of course, FedRAMP had to come along so that federal and defense agencies could use and could migrate to the cloud. But most commercial businesses, you would figure, would want some of the same assurances and protections that the risk management framework, NIST, 853A provides anyway. So what was the big hurdles that in the early, let's say, take us through like year one for even like Google, AWS, and Microsoft Azure? What was the big hurdles that they had to do, or what was some of the things, the challenges they faced into being able to meet the FedRAMP requirements?
Great question. Great question. So a lot of people don't know this, but so this will be a little inside baseball for you guys. But so FedRAMP as a program and there was more than 2,000 pages of processes that went into this. So FedRAMP as a program, I'll call it was in draft form. Okay. And GSA, who was a subcontractor, doing this, and GSA had a meeting with the technical leads of Google and Amazon and Rackspace and uh, uh, you know, Azure, you name it, they were all there. And so we would go through what I'll call the Reader's Digest version of FedRAMP, because they didn't really care how the ball went through the hoop. They just wanted to know what the hoop looked like. So every one of them, to a person, Dave, I don't care what you call it. I don't care what it looks like. Just tell me that this is what it is, and it's not going to change. You do that, and we'll meet it. And I said, great, here you go. And they went through and they had growing pains. And most of it was because we hadn't established a firm PMO yet for the FedRAMP PMO. So these packages that were being written were being submitted to our team. Now, we were all, when I say we, there was three of us. So it's myself, Warren Uting, who was I'm going to call him the de facto federal lead, and I'll get into that in a second, and Tony Maris, who has been by my side for 30 years and is just an absolute encyclopedia on all things NIST. So he kept me honest as we went through, and Warren paved the way for me because, as he would say, you're kind of a bulldog, Dave, but you're my bulldog. So I would tell him, look, this is what we want to accomplish. You need to know how to get that accomplished. And he just kind of knew what buttons to push, which federal, people he needed to talk to kind of pave the way for us as we went on. So each of us, myself in the writing, Tony in the keeping me honest part, and Warren kind of just clearing the path, from federal obstructions, that we would have had, which is normal in any type of, at least to me anyway, you would expect is in any type of organization that is large, like in any single agency within the federal government. So the Googles and Amazons and Microsofts and Rackspace, they all got together and they started submitting things to us. And we, it's just a couple of us, right? So we're going through and reviewing it, and we're just kicking things back left and right because they weren't meeting the controls. This is 2012.
So this would have been DIACAP, huh?
Yeah, well, in
Or
2012,
RMF for federal still. Yes, yes.
yeah. And so this is in 2012. And so they would submit things to us, and we would keep kicking them back, and they were getting frustrated with us. But one thing they can never argue with is, are we giving them unjustified pushback? And so they would call and schedule meetings, and we would go talk to them. And, it's always face to face. And this is why it failed. This is what you can do to fix it. And these are some options that you could look at for fixing. And they each had different issues, I'll say that. But, each of those issues we were able to address. Now, the good part was there was only a handful of companies putting all this, security requirement or security documentation in our hands. Thank God, because the 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 mantra that the government took in regards to FedRAMP is, Dave, we do not want a department of FedRAMP. I want this to be as skeleton crew as possible. I want to have minimum, involvement in this. It's got to be, it can't be a department of FedRAMP. So, right. So we put the onus on cloud service providers. They had to, suck up the expense to get it done. It was no longer on the shoulders of federal agencies to actually go forth and document
So it's
all
part of the
these.
cost of doing business with government.
Yeah. Well, back in the day, right before FedRAMP, anybody who wanted to sell a product, it had to receive an ATO or an authorization to operate. And so the onus fell on the agency to do all that documenting, to do all that research, to do all the testing and everything. So, these guys were the commercial entities were like, great, I've got a widget. Here's my widget. Go out and, make sure it's secure. And if it's not, tell me why and tell me how, and we'll fix it. Well, average cost 150 grand a pop. You get, that's just to create the documentation and testing and everything. Again, 2012. So that all changed. And then we put the onus on the vendors. Like, if you want to make millions and millions and millions of dollars, you got to spend some money up front to prove to the government instead of the government coming behind you and going, well, wait a minute, that's not right. They want you to prove it that it is right prior to being purchased. And because of that, one of the things I'd love to tell everybody is FedRAMP is the only federal program that I know of that is self-sufficient, requires zero funding, and has actually saved the federal government, saved them over $500 million. And I would significantly escalate that number, on a guess, but I can say with absolute positivity, 500 million plus that we have not had to spend. Now, granted, we spent that, elsewhere on other boondoggles, but still, you know.
Well, that's a great efficiency right there out the gate. I mean, I'm sure the Department of Government Efficiency or DOGE would love to pick your brain sometimes over how that was accomplished, so they can maybe see if they
Yeah,
can apply
well,
it to other programs. But um,
we'll
you
see.
know, one of the beautiful things about when you have a program that's done really well, obviously, why reinvent the wheel? Why not use some of those lessons learned or copy? What did it say? What is it called? The sincerest form of flattery is not mimicry, but impersonation is the sincerest form of
Right.
flattery.
Impersonation is the sincerest form of flattery, right?
Yes. So,
So,
yes.
so one thing that we've seen, and I'm writing about this now for a conference that I'm going to be speaking at next month. So when you look at the trickle down effect of FedRAMP, again, keep in mind, FedRAMP has not fundamentally changed in 12 years. Okay, has not changed. CMMC, state ramp, text ramp, HIPAA, even PCI are taking pieces of FedRAMP and leveraging it from a procedural perspective so that they can manage data that is important for them. So like text ramp is a little like state ramp, right? State ramp is a lot like FedRAMP. Okay, as in like it pretty much mirrors it, except that they do it at a more localized type level. HIPAA, they just included a bunch of new requirements, and it's going to mimic aspects of FedRAMP, specifically in the reporting structures. You can't just put up something in the cloud and say, okay, it's secure. There are a lot of reporting mechanisms that have to go in to validate and verify that you as a CSP, this is what you said, this is what reality is, and it better match.
Okay. So you mentioned one of the acronyms in the list of other programs, and one was CMMC. And could you maybe break down the acronym for us and tell us a little bit about what this is and why it's important?
It's cybersecurity maturity model. I can't remember what the last C stands for, to be honest with you. But essentially, it is from a compliance perspective, they're saying using this framework, the framework being NIST 171, and CMMC has some of their own controls that they've kind of mixed in there. And all of these assessment objectives, and you have to implement this if you are a company doing business with the DoD. So, and you're a small, medium business or large business, doesn't matter. You have to meet these requirements. Now, we're CMMC, and it doesn't really matter which side of the fence you fall on. I happen to fall on a certain, side where I can see improvements are needed. But so with FedRAMP and State Ramp and FISMA and all things NIST 853, you have that ability to POAM items, have a plan of action and milestones for security controls that you can't meet yet or haven't met yet, but you do have a plan and funding in place to get it implemented. And there's a bunch of steps that you have to go through for that. Where CMMC is a little, what's the word I'm looking for? Ambitious, is they pretty much, I mean, it's not 100% taking away the POAM idea, but a lot of it is gone. Now, originally I was like, hey, great, no POAMs, no problem. That's great. Well, now it's down to assessment objectives. So if you ever look at a NIST control, doesn't matter what family it is or anything, you will see it has what we call the dash ones, which are you will have a policy and procedure in place, and it must do A, B, C, D, and D, or an E,
Okay.
right? What A, B, C, D, and E, each of those are independent assessment objectives. And if you don't meet one of them, just one of them, done. Okay, you failed, go back to start, do not collect $200. So where FedRAMP and everybody else is, they have POAMs. Now you can't do what, government has done. I've personally seen this, is do what I call a POAM and a promise. So I have seen federal agencies, they have like 52, 53 POAMs. The very first POAM is create all the documentation necessary to get an ATO. All right. It happens a lot more often than you think, and for a variety of different reasons, which we won't get into here. When you take that approach, it's an embarrassing level of security compliance because it just proves that you're not taking it seriously. When CMMC and anybody else who says there's no POAMs, or very few in this case, they have to be mostly paperwork type issues that'll be allowed to be POAMs. But when you have that and you have all those assessment objectives, it makes it harder for each of the implementers of that framework to comply because they don't always understand. They look at a problem, they go, I have to have, a password policy that is this, 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 and this. I got it. That's perfect, right? But yeah, not so much because there was a little verbiage in one of those assessment objectives that you didn't meet. You met the intent of the control, but you didn't meet to the letter of the control. To me, that has already caused problems. I see it with the companies that I help now. They look at it and Dave, there's no way. What are you crazy? I got to do all of this. I'm like,
Oh yeah.
yeah, you do.
It's
But
a
also
it's a big
remember, it's
shock
in
for a lot
minimum
of
baseline.
business, especially your small to medium sized businesses are
Right.
struggling with CMMC. And even to add to the stress of it all, they've had a lot of changes in the past couple of years, right? So now
Yeah.
we're at the CMMC. Is it 2.0 or is it
It's
3.0?
2.0 still.
It's 2.0 still.
Yeah, it's 2.0, but they have NIST 171 R3 they're cooking on now.
So yeah, all right, that's version three or revision three. But there's
Mhm.
constant changes, which is part of, the glory of NIST is that there are constantly putting out to industry, taking in feedback, and always revising it and trying to keep the documentation current. So I give them thumbs up on that. But for a business that started, let's say, with CMMC 1.0, and they were trying to work through that, trying to navigate that maze of controls and try to get as compliant as they can get, and all of a sudden, in that time, as they're trying to work towards that, you got version 2.0 comes out. Then you got a revision 3, and it's like, okay, we were working towards these things. Now we need to maybe take these, shifting priorities, if you will, when it comes to budgets and what you're going to pay for
Sure.
each year towards getting more compliant. So this definitely caused a lot of small to medium business owners to get really worried at first. And of course, a lot of the bigs, the big defense contract companies, which are already level 3 CMMC certified, and also have all these other CMMI dev, CMMI security. They got those accreditations as well because they're bigs. They can afford all the accreditations in the world and dedicate lots of teams to doing the paperwork, etc. But a lot of businesses out there, and maybe folks that might be watching this video, are really nervous about trying to, do the documentation. Not only just do the documentation, but in the event that that agency or the office that's supposed to conduct the audits, if they ever start getting down to the small to medium businesses, that there's going to be a lot of money spent and they might not meet the bar. So, Dave, I guess if we were talking to right now to a small to medium business owner or a board member of a small medium business and they're concerned about CMMC, what is some of the guidance? What would you have, what are some documents they need to get really friendly with besides the 170 document you mentioned? But what are some other documents and websites that they can get really, really friendly with on a first name basis with? And what are resources that people can go to just get a start on trying to, eat this elephant?
Hmm. Elephant is a pretty good analogy there. So there's a few. So you can go to cyberab.com, and that is the accreditation body for all things CMMC. Essentially, that is the initial spot where everybody has to go to gather data that is sanctioned by the CMMC AB. Okay. Other places to go, Summit 7. I have no affiliation with them whatsoever, but Jacob Horn, uh, he is a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of knowledge. My favorite is Amira Arman. So it's Amira, last name Armond or Mand. And it's Curie Solutions, Kieri Solutions. I've known Amira for a long, long time, and she has been involved in CMMC since day one. And the information and the guidance that she puts out, free to everybody. The most important thing to know, it's right. That's what you need. And she is all about sharing that information, making sure that life is as easy for the companies doing business with DoD that have to be or affected by CMMC, and they have to be compliant. She puts that information out there. She provides products. Say that up front. She, use them, don't use them. She's somewhat agnostic about that. But she is one of the few people that kind of ate her own dog food. Before she started putting out templates and processes and technologies to leverage and everything, she did it all first, and she did it herself, without any outside help, so she could actually document the landmines that she found and things like that. So use those resources. Uh, they won't steer you wrong. They won't
Awesome.
steer you wrong.
Well, I did take some notes, but David, if you would still send me the URLs and I'll make sure that I get
Yep.
the exact right ones. And look, don't worry about Google searching, folks. It'll be in the description. Just click the details in the description. You'll get all the URLs we're talking about right now. Well, David, I know
Yep.
we could spend hours upon hours talking about cloud security, and I actually want to talk about cloud security. So before I go to the next segment, actually, when it comes to cloud security, what are your current concerns about cloud security from your perspective? And what do you think the future holds for cloud security? Because what we've seen happen is, for the past several years, a lot of people did the migration to the cloud, right? Then some people said, whoa, we don't need to put everything there. So they ended up doing the hybrid cloud environments where you got a little bit of on-prem and a little bit out here. Now, what you're seeing is a lot of people, because now we're talking about things like data sovereignty and AI and so forth. So a lot of folks are looking, not a lot, let me correct myself. Some businesses are now pulling stuff back from the cloud and going back to bare bones or on-prem. And what are your thoughts and your perspective on this?
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
We'll take it in reverse order. So companies that are trying to move things from the cloud and do on-prem, there's a couple of reasons that they could be doing that. I'm not going to pretend to know what they're doing or why they're doing it, but reasons, off the top of my head that I can see that they're doing this is they have complete control of their data, complete control. They know internally where it is stored, processed, and transmitted, how it is done, what are those mechanisms, who has access, what level of encryption. There's no, I'm inheriting these controls from this giant, and they're going to do it. Well, no, inheritance works is less of an inheritance is not an issue so much on-prem, okay? Because you are solely responsible because you put it in your data center. When you go to a cloud, it's somebody else's data center, and you're putting that information up, and you have to trust from an inheritance model. What are my roles? What are my responsibilities as a business owner? So how do I protect my data? Well, you have to look at every single thing, just like you do on-prem, but you have to look at everything from a third-party perspective. And when you change your mindset, all of a sudden you're thinking, okay, great, they're doing that. They're going to be responsible. So the one thing I tell everybody is you can always outsource responsibility. You cannot outsource accountability. And when there's a failure, and there will be a failure, you will be held to account. You can point fingers to Google and Amazon and Azure all you want, but it's your client, it's their data that you took responsibility and are accountable for. So,
That's really fun. I'm glad you actually mentioned that. The way I tell people about it when they're like, "Oh, I'm just," and this is just for personal people that put their stuff on like the iCloud or Google Drive or any other cloud type service like this. I tell people, I said, "Well, here's the real concern. Give me your wallet." And of course, people are like, "What? Just let me hold your wallet for you." Right? Because your wallet has your IDs, identification, your credit cards, your financials. A lot of your life is in your wallet. Then as soon as they hand me the wallet, I said, now give me your phone. And they're like, what's going on here? I said, that's essentially what you're doing with your data is everything's on your phone, all your important cards and other business stuff is in your wallet, and you're handing them to me to hold for you. And you don't feel comfortable about that. Yet when it's Google or Microsoft or AWS, we immediately feel a sense of security because they're too big to fail, right? And data breaches happen all the time, right? So that's the analogy I usually give people when they're thinking about just putting everything in their lives up on the cloud. And I'm like, you know, trust,
right,
but there's a risk to it. You're giving over, but you're right. You can't get rid of the accountability because it's your data, your information.
right. And I tell everybody using a similar type analogy, think of it as your bank. You have all of your savings, not counting your investments and everything, but you have your savings and your day-to-day money, everything's in a bank. And you're trusting that bank to protect your money from fraud and et cetera. Well, when something happens, and everybody, I don't care who you are, you've been affected by a bank screwing something up, you know, all of a sudden you lose your mind. But that's a bank. That's your data. It got compromised somehow, and it's affecting your money. You've lost your mind on dollars. Now, take that and magnify it by companies losing data. That data is what keeps them in business. And I don't care if your profit margin is $10,000 or $10 billion, it is directly proportional to that data that you're, storing, processing, or transmitting on behalf of your clients. And that data value is a hell of a lot more than what people have in the bank, unless you're those top 10 people,
Yeah.
So you have to look at it just, the same way, just take it more seriously.
Wow. So, David, this is one of my favorite questions I always love to ask my guests. So, if we can go back in time to your day one, the first day when you said, "Hey, I want to do IT, cyber, and security. This is what I want my career to be." Do you have a story around that day one, and do you mind sharing it with us?
Absolutely. All right. So I was at the time I was working at the Department of Energy as a contractor. Okay. Now it's important for everybody to kind of know my dad was a military police, so I was always, there's good guys, there's bad guys, there's the right way to do things and, way to do things right. So I kind of always had that instilled in me. But I didn't get started until I was like 33 and so in IT at all, you know, and for a variety of reasons. But so I started at the bottom. I was doing hardware repair. I was fixing monitors and stuff at the component level because that's what my associate's degree was in, electronic technology. Then as I went back to school and I ended up getting my another associate's degree in computer studies, then all of a sudden I'm like, okay, I'm getting this. Now you got to keep in mind, my wife is an analyst and she's 10,000 times smarter than I am, right? And she was working at Department of Energy and she knew, my problem solving skills. I just didn't have the IT chops, to back it up. I could do it, but I didn't have that work experience. So I ended up getting a job working help desk support, just tier one, kind of easy stuff. And then I just kept getting better at it and better at it and better at it. And great. So one day I'm working in a classified area because I had my Q clearance and Floyd McLeod. Now, to picture Floyd McLeod, you have to picture Sidney Poitier.
Okay.
Imagine Sidney Poitier dressed to the nines, SES, so he's a senior executive service, right? Working in a classified environment. And he walks up to me one day and says, Dave, I've got a security problem. I'd like you to just kind of weigh in on it, see if you have any ideas. And it was to implement hard passwords. I need a way to force it. And so I didn't know, but I knew a guy who could code. So I asked him, I said, what can I do? So we, as a proof of concept, I deconfigured the pass filter for Microsoft, changed the code, and then recompiled it. And I changed everything. So it could immediately be pushed out. Just proof of concept. Now, obviously, we couldn't do it that way. But because I did it that way, all of a sudden, all these bells are going off in my head going, wait, you can take a different approach and do this, and you could do that. And so Floyd McLeod would just encourage those, try this, try that. Hey, Dave, we just got a new software for, security cameras. See if you can break into them. Heck, I don't know. I'm not a hacker, but I'm like, all right, fine. It's going to cost you a pizza. So he ordered me a pizza and I sat at my desk. And by the time I was done with the pizza, I sent him, screenshots of all, because we had found all these holes. And so I was hooked from then on, to do security. Well, the one thing that he had that nobody else had was a need to complete an organizational security plan. I want you to tell me this is, we didn't have all the FISMA things yet. This is, in the 90s. So we got to look at access control and training and physical and just all the domains. Okay. So I sat down and I best guessed it. Well, they implemented it right then and there. It got modified when FISMA came out in 2002, but still, I mean, I was just hooked. And so each day, he would give me a new task or just, drop something on me as a surprise. And I loved it. I was digging it, every day I got excited to go to work, which was honestly, I wasn't excited when I was just doing, help desk stuff, but I would get excited and he would just let me play with new tools, like back when, before the Blackberries, but when we had those, those little pocket assistants. I don't remember what Palm Pilots.
PDAs, Palm
Yeah.
Pilots.
So it would be like, okay, well, how would you steal data on that? So I took a Palm Pilot into a meeting with a bunch of his folks and I started, because if you were close enough, you could, I could beam it to you and take it back. And so all of that kind of stuff, he just loved it that I never backed down. So, I got into the compliance side. Fast forward a little bit is when I met Warren Udy. So Warren Udy, probably the man I have the most respect for in this business. He's completely retired now, but he knew what he wanted and he knew how to get it. As far as from a programmatic perspective, what he needed was people to do the legwork and that understood his vision and could work together with him. And there's a guy who and God, I've known Warren for 25, 30, almost 30 years now, and he's never said a bad word about anybody. He's thought a lot of them, but he's never said a bad word about anybody. And so he would just say, "Hey, Dave, what do you think about this? What do you think about that?" And that just kept me engaged. And he's the guy who, because he managed to get himself detailed over to GSA because they had this FedRAMP thing that they wanted to do. He's like, "I don't know how to do it, but I got the guy." So,
I know a guy.
he put me up and the rest is history.
Wow. Thank you for sharing your story with me and anyone watching this episode. I mean, the reason why I love these stories is because, someone could be watching this video right now thinking, when you said early in the beginning part of your story, it wasn't until you was in your early 30s. And a lot of people, when they think about taking that jump into like doing help desk service desk, they're like in their early 20s. And nowadays there's a joke about you need 8 years experience. You gotta be 21
Right.
years old with 8 years experience to do service desk. It's like, wait a minute, I just got out of high school.
Come on, right.
But it's so what is interesting about your story and what I love about it is that it doesn't matter how old you are. At any point in life, you can pivot into cyber, and all of your experiences and knowledge that you had from whatever other career you have has value in cyber because it gives you a different perspective, a clean set of eyes. Whereas people that's been working in cyber like me, 30 plus years, I may have blinders on that I don't realize yet. And having someone
Mhm.
like, Dave or anybody come brand new in and go, "Hey, what's this?" And I'll be like, "What? What do you mean?" "Oh, you know, and it's
Right,
always great. We need all perspectives, all career backgrounds, and no matter your age, cyber needs you. And so I love
right.
that about your
So
story.
I'll tell you this. I think this is an important distinction. So I tell everybody, I don't care how, like my nephew just retired from the military, right? He's just now, he's never done IT, but he wants to get into cyber. So so I'm like, okay, great. It's not hard, but you have to want it
Yes.
because cyber's not easy. It's not easy. It is filled with bad days. It is filled with people that are passing bucks. You will always be held to account, even when it's not your fault. And you get kicked while you're down a lot.
Yes.
But if you like not the brutality of it all, but if you like the challenges, there's nothing like it. For me, if you want to get into cyber, you better love to be right on whatever it is you do. You better love to be right and have
Love to
that
be
need,
right.
because when everybody's going to be telling you when you're wrong, even when they don't understand it, because it didn't work first time, you were wrong. Well, no, you just kind of knock something out of the way so you keep moving forward. You've got to have, that want to. And if you have it, you will succeed. I've
Dave,
met a
I can
lot of
identify
people.
with exactly what you're saying. There's been so many instances. Even recently, there's been instances where I'll have a leader call a meeting, and let's say my team, the cybersecurity, is everybody's pointing the fingers at cybersecurity, right?
Right,
And when I'm running my team in operations, I know all the ins and outs, of everything we're doing. I know where the skeletons are in the organization. I know everything, right? And so
right,
when I get called in by a senior leader, and they're like, "Hey, what's going on with cyber this or that," and and the finger pointing, a lot of people like to not take accountability for what they're responsible for, and all of a sudden I'm getting questioned about this and this. I'm like, well, that's another group, that's operations, that's another group, that's the NOS for that. So I'm like completely deflected. But I said, hold up, let me just stop right here because I don't want to be the one pointing fingers. So this is where that term,
right,
they call it tact, right? The ability to tell someone to go to hell and they anticipate the journey. So then I turn it around. Not that I'm referring to my senior leader, I'm referring to other people in the room that would have already pointed the finger to cyber. And I'll just say, per our policies, per our procedures, and per our lanes of responsibility, because we have a thing called separation of duties, this is what my team's lane is and what we do on a regular basis. And then, once I started articulating the lanes of responsibility, I'm not pointing fingers. I'm not saying it's that department guy's problem, that's her problem over there. I'm saying here's the levels of responsibility. Here's where our responsibility starts and ends, and everything else is outside of that is someone else's. I'm not going to point the fingers, but this is what my lane of responsibility, and here is the proof that that operation happens consistently without failure. And so I've had to do that so many times, but you got to do it in a way where you're not necessarily saying, well, it's not my fault. You just got to, you take accountability for what you're responsible for and you move it along. But you're absolutely right. There'll be so many times in your career where other people, and it's human nature to defer the blame, point to someone else, and throw someone else under the bus, as we call it. But you know what? When it is time for you to take that bus hit, be the bus stop. Sometimes be the person on the bus and sometimes be willing to be at the bus stop for when it comes for you. But you know what? You're absolutely right. Accountability is huge. But that's also where reputation and character get made is right there on accountability. So I love that. Thank you
Yep.
for sharing that with us, Dave. Dave, this is the part of the podcast where I like to just have what I call my moment of levity. We've been talking a lot of tech, a lot of cyber stuff, so I just kind of want to have a
Yeah.
bit of fun. These are rapid fire questions with no right or wrong answers. So if you will indulge me, I'm gonna hit you with some questions. Give me the first answer
Okay.
that pops in your head.
This is going to be interesting.
Okay, if you're ready, let's go.
Sure,
So,
let's fire away.
all right, first one up. Cake or pie?
Cake,
Cake. What kind of cake?
German chocolate.
Oh, German chocolate. He already knew. He already had his favorite. All right. This is gonna
Yeah,
divide the
I only
room.
say that 'cause my birthday was yesterday.
Oh,
So
well,
my
happy
wife,
birthday.
she's like, "Hey, German chocolate."
German chocolate. If you don't mind sharing, how many rotations around the sun have you made it?
62.
Wow, 62. Congratulations, man. That's
Yeah,
awesome. So German cake. All right, next one up. Ready? It is just going to divide the room, okay? So with all
okay.
techies out there, this is going to divide the room.
Oh my
Star
God.
Wars or Star Trek?
Star Trek.
Star Trek. What's your favorite cast? What's your favorite Kirk?
Uh, hello. Hello.
Shatner.
The, not
Okay.
the original, but the second. So,
Yeah.
God, why can I not think of his name? He's like a Star Trek god.
William Shatner?
Shatner.
Yeah,
William
Shatner.
Shatner.
All
Thank you.
right. Okay, here we go. Next question. Is a hot dog a sandwich?
No, hot dog's a hot dog.
Hot dog's a
And
hot
I'm a hot dog connoisseur. I travel the country checking out hot dogs.
What's the most hot dogs you've ever eaten in one sitting in your entire life?
Nine.
Nine.
Yeah.
Whoa.
But
Okay.
that was 30 years ago.
All right. What is your most favorite book of all time that you've read, and what is the last book you've read?
Um, well, my favorite book, because it has stuck with me all my life, is Jaws. It's the first book I ever read that grabbed me on page one and kept me till the end. And I was, what, 14 when this came out, 13,
So this
14
is
when
the
this came
book
out?
that Stephen King based the film. I mean, not Stephen King,
The Peter
Steven
Benchley
Spielberg.
book. Yeah, Peter Benchley's book. Yeah, it just, I was a young kid and it just kept me. And even today, like the best scene in the whole movie is the opening scene.
Really?
In the book, they really played that out. And it was just awesome.
Wow.
It just stuck with me for, 50 years.
Well, just to ask a follow-up to that, is there something that the film nailed absolutely right to what you read in the book?
Only the opening scene.
The opening scene. Okay. Then my
Yeah, where they
follow-up, I
go
have just one more because I read about this phenomenon, and for me, it's Lord of the Rings. So as I grew up, I loved reading Lord of the Rings like every other year, and then I had a vision of what those characters look like to me. But then the films come out, and there's something that happens that when you watch the film version of a book, those characters supplant what your memory of the characters that you imagined first when you was reading. So when you read the book Jaws as a 14-year-old, but then later saw the film, can you remember what the characters looked like in your memory from 14?
Yeah, I mean, everybody, for the most part, looked, the one person to the Richard Dreyfuss character, I had completely different person in my head,
Okay.
but everybody else was pretty much Quinn was right on the money. I'll say that.
Okay. Awesome. All right. So, and what's your most recent book you've read?
Um, I'm reading another one now. I just finished The Journey of Crazy Horse,
Okay. Is it like a
and that
documentary?
Kinda, yeah. Yeah. It's
Okay.
just to me, I've always interested in Indian cultures and specifically those that get misunderstood. And so this was a really, I really enjoyed the book. It was good. But now I'm reading about Washington spies,
Oh, okay.
George Washington spy ring.
Oh, well, if you could definitely give me the links to those books as well with all the other links from earlier in
Sure.
the episode, I'll definitely put all them in the description below because I love talking about books that people have read. Dave, I know you have a tremendous, day job already with everything that you do in your day, but a lot of us sometimes find time to work on side projects or other creative endeavors. Is there anything that you want to talk about on the podcast regarding any side projects or businesses or things that you'd like to share?
Well, it's not so much working for, but supporting is more what I do. So there's like I like local charities, that are local to my area where I live, so I feel like the impact that I make is greater at a local level. So there's something called Blessings in a Backpack. And
Oh.
essentially it's how to get students, all students, um, all the materials that they need for, to succeed in school. There's too many students that already go to school, they don't have notebooks and paper and pencils, just the
The
basics,
basics, yeah.
plus, honestly, they need help. And so I like to help.
Wonderful.
So
Is
that's a
there
big
is
one.
there a website or a social media account that you could also share with me? And I'll make sure it's in the description below if people can
Absolutely. I'll send
follow
that
the
to
work
you.
that they do and maybe even donate and contribute as well. With
Absolutely.
that, what I like to do is now we're pretty much wrapping up now, David, but I like to always give my guests kind of like the final word. So when it comes to FedRAMP, CMMC accreditations, doing security controls, the whole shebang. What is your final word on why this is important? Why companies need to really pay attention to the letter of the law? And yeah, what is the big why?
Okay. Uh, well, it's a little different for each. I will say this for FedRAMP is, you need to know those differences and you need to be very familiar with what the requirements are and how to meet those requirements. If you're not sure, you know, heck, reach out to me. I'll gladly take a phone call and help you out. I don't mind. It's more important because FedRAMP is my baby, so, it's not as scary when you know the ins and outs, it's not as scary as people make it sound. CMMC, the biggest thing is knowing what not to do, you know. And so those are the kind of things that I like to help teach people, let me show you how not to do this. Because in my experiences, I've learned more from screwing up than I have from being successful,
Yeah.
you know. And you just have to be willing to go, damn, I did not see that coming, you know, pick it up and move forward. To quote the great Rocky, nothing hits as hard as life, you
Yeah.
know. So, you got to be able to get hit and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done. So, those parts are important. But the key is when you look at all compliance requirements and you look at it from the lens of security, I will tell you this. I've been part of or led or performed over 100 plus security assessments, personally speaking.
Wow.
Okay. And that's over, since Fred Flintstone was in government, so uh, and the one thing that always kind of irked me was is it security or is it compliance? You can't have both. Compliance, paperwork exercise. That'll, talk about something that'll get me fired up. And security, that's what we do. But you know what I've noticed over the years? There's not one secure system that doesn't meet the requirements. You know, lots that met the requirements that weren't secured, but that all depends on how you look at POAMs, and so on. And again, it's not to paint everything with one brush, but the argument in our business is compliance does not equal security. Well, that's not the case. We both, one is the directions of the minimum security controls that need to be in place. And the other is how those are implemented. They go hand in glove, so let's just work together and quit trying to, denigrate one over the other, because you got to have both. Because
Well said.
nobody, if your client tells you, how are you protecting or asks you, how are you protecting my data? And you say, look, you know what? I've got my SOC 2 report for you. Here you go. That's how I'm protecting your data. That means nothing, nothing. And if you told them, well, I'm encrypting all your data, well, that means nothing. You got to give them, details. You do a SOC 2, again, not a high bar, and it's only really for financial type information. But if you're going to implement the controls, you need to understand what right looks like. And if you can do that, then you're able to divorce yourself from the argument and go, you know what? It doesn't matter why. It's the who, what, when, where, and how. You answer those five, interrogative statements,
Mhm.
and they will tell you, what right looks like and how to report it. And you'll be surprised at how many of your customers will look at that information and go, oh, that's what that means. Whereas if you just do one of those five, they're going to go, oh, I think I know what that means. So clarity's king.
Wow. Well, David, such well-spoken last word there. Folks, David, we're going to share his LinkedIn profile below if you want to follow him and the great work that he does. I mean, again, thank you so much. The father of FedRAMP, Dave Fairburn, here with us today. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me, Jim. I appreciate it.